While I have a YouTube channel, Joel from Panzerfaust Armory really ups me and simply has tube. Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. Joel from Panzerfaust Armory happens to have an SOT and has given me some access to a STEN MKIII, his first full auto build. I'm grateful for this opportunity to make a video on something I normally wouldn't be able to. The STEN was simple, kind of ugly, and most importantly an effective and easily mass-produced workhorse that served the Commonwealth and resistance forces well throughout World War II and for a while after. As always, let's start with some background history. Prior to the Second World War, Great Britain had virtually no submachine gun development. What submachine guns they had were Thompsons purchased from the United States. The beginning of the war saw Germany overrun France, as well as the British Expeditionary Force via Blitzkrieg. A large chunk of the BEF manpower would be rescued from Dunkirk, but most weaponry, including many large and small submachine guns, would have to be abandoned as loot to the advancing Germans, leaving Great Britain in a precarious state when it came to arms. Britain would look to the United States and Thompson submachine guns. Due to the Neutrality Act in 1939, the United States can only sell arms to belligerents if it paid up front, and the warring nations shipped the items themselves in a policy called cash and carry. Britain would pay a small fortune for the Thompsons, only for about 2/3 of them to end up in the bottom of the Atlantic thanks to the Kriegsmarine U-boats. As the Battle of Britain would commence, obtaining submachine guns became a priority as there was a general belief that Germany intended to invade. An aside, and something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Pop history tells us that Hitler had a desire to invade Great Britain and would have made the attempt had the air campaign succeeded. There are two factors that make this landing very unlikely. Hitler was always laser focused to invade the Soviet Union, and while he paid lip service to Operation Sea Lion, the likeliness he would sign off on it was slim. The other, much more practical reason Operation Sea Lion wouldn't have happened was the lack of landing craft. When we picture landings during World War II, we picture American-made amphibious landing craft. Germany did not possess such craft, and the plans called for using river barges. This would have been a disaster crossing the channel. German naval historian K.J. Becker was pretty adamant about this in his book, Hitler's Naval War. Of course, Great Britain did not know that the invasion was unlikely, so they needed weapons, especially submachine guns to defend their island. As it looked more likely the United States would get pulled into the war on the side of the Allies, Lend-Lease would be passed in the spring of 1941, allowing materials to be used at no cost until returned or destroyed. Between the Battle of Atlantic losses and the U.S. officially joining the war in December 1941, Thompsons would be needed for U.S. use, and Britain would look to build their own submachine gun. In late 1940, Britain looked to flat-out copy Hugo Schmeisser's German MP-28-2. Major Reginald Vernon Shepard and Harold John Turpin of the Enfield factory were tasked with making a couple prototypes, one in 7.63 Mauser and the other 9mm Parabellum. They opted to go with the latter caliber as resistance fighters would be able to use ammo taken from the enemy. Since equipment and know-how were reserved with making the Bren machine guns, the War Department would task the Sterling Engineering Company Limited to manufacture a British copy. Engineer George Lancaster was tasked with making this all happen. Lancaster would make a few modifications, including a butt based off the Lee Enfield rifles. 50,000 would be ordered. Weaknesses would be found and updates made, but a heavy reliance on subcontracting and the fact that the Lancaster was neither economical or expedient to produce would eventually doom its further production. Most Lancasters would find their way into the Navy. Shepard and Turpin had already looked into further simplification of manufacturing a submachine gun. This was initially rejected by the War Department, but the realities in 1940 would make them reconsider. Two prototypes, dubbed the T-40, would be quickly made and ready on January 8, 1941. They were made from pressed parts that could be easily subcontracted. It would be christened the STEN from Shepard, Turpin, and EN coming from England. Now, while the internet and pop history say EN comes from Enfield, my main source, Guillou, sorry I mispronounced his name, my main source for this video, says it was England, although he does not cite this claim. It would be adopted on March 7, 1941 as the Carbine Machine STEN Mark I. This is made from a cylindrical receiver where a trigger housing was welded. It had a mobile breech which housed a fixed firing pin. There was a wooden handguard with a folding vertical foregrip. The stock was 2 tubes with a welded butt plate. The safety would be sliding the bolt handle into the groove. The magazine would be interchangeable with Lancasters, but capacity would be reduced from 50 to 32 rounds, as the 50-round mags were a weak spot on the Lancasters. Their heavy weight could cause feeding incidents. The Mark I would also have a flash hider. The first updates would replace the wood handguard with a metal one, remove the folding grip, and remove the conical flash hider. This would be the Mark I Star. The Mark I and Mark I Star would take 12 man-hours per weapon to produce. Simplifications and more compactness were desired for paratroopers and drops to resistance. A request from the Ministry of Defense would be dated March 24, 1941, and Harold Turpin would succeed in presenting a prototype of what would become the Mark II in only 7 days. Improvements would include easy disassembly of the barrel, magazine housing that could be turned 90 degrees toward the bottom for transport and tight packing for drops, and the bolt handle safety would be repositioned toward the top. A new stock/butt would also be created from just one tube. The flat butt would be referred to as the T-butt, while the later curved stock butt would be called the skeleton butt. Productions of STENs would take place at the Royal Ordnance Factories of Fairservice, Thiel, and Enfield, as well as the private firm Birmingham's Small Arms Factory. Long Branch in Canada and Precision Engineering in New Zealand would also produce STENs. These factories would basically perform final assembly of weapons from parts made by hundreds of small metalworks subcontractors. One of these metal companies, Line Brothers Limited, who produced parts for the Bren light machine gun and contracted to build STEN Mark I's and later parts for the Mark II, the engineers of Line Brothers looked to simplify the Mark II using the maximum number of parts made from bent or pressed sheet metal. This would also be stripped down to the bare bones and become the Mark III, which is what Joel has and I present today. The barrel cannot be dismantled. The receiver was a single metal cylinder, or tube, and surrounded the barrel except for the last few inches. Unlike previous STENs where the receivers were made from a stretched tube, they'd be made from a sheet metal rolled into a cylinder and welded in the upper part. The magazine well would also be fixed. The bolt, recoil spring, and trigger mechanism are identical to the Mark II. The Mark III went from prototype in late 1941, early 42 to having 500,000 ordered in the late January. The order was completed in October of that year. Line Brothers designed it so most, if not all, the parts could be produced in-house. While the Mark III set records in quickness of production, it would lack the robustness of earlier models. This would be the reason the Mark III did not ultimately replace the Mark II. Let's take a little closer look at Joel's Mark III.
Alright, let's take a little closer look at the STEN. Now, Joel's STEN is a Mark III. One difference between the Mark II and III between the Mark I was the Mark I actually had this little safety catch down here. It moved up to here for the Mark II because they found out it was easier for the operator to operate it. The Mark III is the most simplified version of the STEN. It was the quickest to be able to reproduce, but on the flip side, it was a little less robust than the Mark II and III. But it's still very easy to take down. One thing about the Mark III is, you have it goes over the barrel almost all the way to the very end. So you hold on to that, your hand isn't going to get hot while shooting this. But let's take this down. First of all, we'll take our magazine out. So push that down, take it out, show that we're clear, and go ahead. Since this is an open bolt, we're going to hit the trigger so it's decocked. All you have to do is you got to push that button in and you pull your butt down. Now you can use either needle nose pliers or a rifle round here. Push that in, turn that, and that comes right out. You have that cap. Pull your spring out. Pull your bolt back. Pull your handle out. Bolt firing pin slide right out, and you are field stripped for cleaning. So it's a very simple process. But then again, it is tube, so it's very simple. Let's go ahead and try putting this back together. Now you got your hole for your handle, charging handle there. So you want to face that out, stick that in. You got to pull your trigger back to push that in. Pull that into your safety catch. Put your charging handle back in. Got to pull your trigger, let that go all the way to the front. Stick your spring in. Put your cap. Now there's a little slot little slot on each side. You got to mate that up to that to initially get that in. So once you get that in, turn it. Well, I wasn't looking when I did that. Again, that's where your round or your needle nose would come in handy. So that's back in, and our butt, we just stick that in a little slot there. Push that down. And we are back together. Now, as you can see, Joel's has the T-butt on there as opposed to the skeleton butt that I talked about in the history portion of the video. So if you like what you've seen so far, please drop a like below. Otherwise, stay tuned. I'm going to do some shooting footage and finish out the history on this.
The numbers of STEN produced would be gargantuan. 200,000 Mark I's and 100,149 Mark I stars would be produced at Singer. Nearly 2.6 million Mark II's would be produced by the various manufacturers. 877 Mark III's produced at Line Brothers, and over 525,000 Mark V's, something I'll get to in a bit, were produced at Forsakerly and Enfield. There would also be copies made in other countries, with Russia and even Germany taking a stab at making them. The Mark II's would be the STEN most people picture, as they are the bulk of what the military and resistant fighters use. Mark III's would find their way into the Home Guard, whose Thompsons and earlier STENs would be feraled away to the military and commandos. Being cheaply made and quickly produced, the STENs would exhibit expected problems in the field, but it was said that they, or at the very least the Mark II, performed as well as the German MP40. I mentioned a Mark V. The Mark IV was an experimental short STEN that didn't really go anywhere. As the war started to improve for the British in late 1943, they looked to actually go from simplification to making improved versions of the Mark II. The barrel would once again be dismantled, the front side would gain lateral apertures, the adoption of a rear pistol grip, a wooden butt, a perforated barrel case in the front with the possibility of a forward hand grip could be added. There was also the possibility of attaching a bayonet. While I don't mean to denigrate the STEN, as it would serve fairly well, the Mark V is basically polishing a turd, and the British Army was already looking to replace the STEN by the end of the war. The Sterling would be developed during the war and officially replaced the STEN in 1953. Still, the STEN was still used with the British in various roles until the 1960s and 70s, and is likely being used to this day in various parts around the world. Joel's STEN was his first project after getting his SOT, and thankfully he let me shoot it. This is also my first experience shooting a full auto firearm. The STEN is very easy to control and to keep on target. Granted, I'm 240 pounds of recoil mitigating fat, but it should be controllable for someone much smaller than I. The beautiful simplicity of the STEN is its example of what can be done when backs are pushed against the wall, and can be used at great effect by resistance fighters. And if you want to learn more about another firearm used with resistance stories in World War II, click over here. Please join the GOA, get $5 off your membership with the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.